This is Michael James. I am your host for this morning's edition. And I've got a couple of guests coming up. I've got Bill Bowden and Dave Salzman from the Chicago Diamonds Blues Band. Good morning to you, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Close to the mics. Close to the mics. They're not as fancy mics as you're used to when you're playing your jams.
Right.
Dave Salzman and I go way back. In my younger years, I was teaching at Columbia College. I was teaching a class called Organizing for Social Change. One of my best students was Dave Salzman. And over the years, I've run into him. He's played here. He's done some printing that I was involved with. And it's great to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's good to have you. And you, when did you get into music? When I first knew you, you weren't not a musician, or at least I didn't know you as a musician.
Right. Well, I was starting out back in the day. What was that, like the late 70s when I was
Long
in your
time
class?
ago.
So, yeah, 30
You
years
were around
have
when I
passed
was
already.
first talking about setting up the Heartland and first opened it up.
Yeah, and the place looks great. It's just it's wonderful to be here, you know. But anyway, I was starting out in music back in the 70s and wasn't playing actively at the time when I had your class. But as I got into the 80s, I started playing with bands quite a bit and been doing it ever since.
And you have a band called the Chicago Diamonds.
We do.
And it's you together. You guys have how many people are in this band, and who's the head of the band? And the other guest here is Bill Bowden. How are you, Bill?
Good.
Good to have you up so early.
Thanks.
Well, he was just commenting as he came up. This is a pretty early hour for a musician, especially since these gentlemen are actually going to play at the Heartland Cafe tonight with the Chicago Diamonds and along with Pee Wee Hayes.
That's right. Pee Wee Hayes from Racine, Wisconsin will be coming down and joining us tonight.
So, Bill,
Yes.
tell us about getting up this early and what's a musician's life like?
Well, we got to bed about 3 o'clock in the morning
Had a
last
show
night.
last night. So.
Where'd you play last night? Up in the suburbs somewhere?
Yeah, up in Northbrook, a place called Hanson Brothers Tavern.
Nice.
Yeah.
How'd you have a turnout? Good turnout?
Yeah, it was a real nice night. Yeah.
Good show.
And who was the front man for you?
Well, actually, that band was called the Tabasco Sound Kitchen, which is another project that I play with. Yeah, we play in a couple different bands around the city.
Same guys?
There's a core group of musicians, but we bring in different players for different bands,
Well,
and
when I was
whichever available.
When I was looking at your website, it's like a lot of the blues bands that I see. It tends to be a good number of the musicians tend to be white guys who grew up being real excited about blues being played by mostly black musicians, and there is a core of older black musicians, blues musicians that are kind of be the front guys for these bands. How does that work?
Well,
And I guess what is are there blues bands coming up that are just African Americans? Are there?
Sure.
I'm interested in the phenomena of I remember when the shift was in the 70s when it was like you used to get to see a blues band. It would be not only Muddy Waters, James Cotton, various people,
Sure.
but then you started seeing lots of really journeyman, very skillful white musicians playing and along with these older blues guys. What's your situation?
well, I was playing rock and roll mainly from the 70s and into the 80s, but I always really enjoyed blues and roots music, R&B, and things like that. Ever since I was a kid, I gravitated towards these types of sounds. And so in more recent years, I've gotten more involved with playing blues with guys like a friend of mine, Dave Spector, who introduced me to Jimmy Johnson, who's a legendary Chicago blues guy, and we have the pleasure of often featuring Jimmy as our lead guitarist and singer with the Chicago Diamonds when we can. We love to have him. And tonight we've got Pee Wee Hayes. Pee Wee is a guy from Racine, Wisconsin. He grew up in Tennessee, and I wish he could have joined us today, but he couldn't get down to the Chicago area
We want him
until
to
a
get
little
his rest
later.
because he's going to have a good crowd here tonight. I know.
Well, I know he's looking forward to it too.
I actually came up the opposite route. Being a bass player, I always admired the bass players in soul and R&B, and so I originally started playing blues, R&B, soul music back in the 60s and 70s, and never really liked rock. And we've kind of met halfway after all of these years.
How many guys? Who's the core of your band? You have a keyboard player
We
too.
do. Rob Waters is our keyboard player, and Rob.
He's sleeping.
Yeah, no, I think he's helping someone move this morning. But,
Yeah, Rob and I have played together since back in the '60s, on and off. And Rob currently is the keyboard player with Lonnie Brooks' band, and we had a group called the Chicago Diamonds back in the late '70s, early '80s. And we've kind of put it back together since Rob has a lot of time when Lonnie isn't on tour. And we hooked up with Dave, and then we kind of have a rotating group of drummers that we bring in. And basically, we see our mission just to back up people like Jimmy Johnson and Pee Wee Hayes.